everyone. My name is Ricardo Birmann. I am here today with someone who is very hard to introduce. I mean, I have been thinking about this. How do you introduce Jan Gehl? And I think I could say he's a living legend more than anything else. He's a big idol, a big reference. He's a landmark, I would say, for urban thinking. And he's probably one of the greatest, more important references and more important persons on the entire debate about city building worldwide. He has worked around the world promoting his ideas and his methodology, and he has written several books. By the way, he is celebrating this year 50 years from his first book, Life Between Buildings, which is an amazing and exceptional book, and it's very, very influential in the urban realm as a whole. Jan, thank you so much for being here with us. It's more than an honor. I think I'm overwhelmed by this. I'm a big fan, and it's amazing to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. I knew I had one fan in Brazil. I didn't know it was you.
You have many, many fans in Brazil. I mean, we all love you here, Jan. But yeah, I was thinking about this interview as I was preparing for it, and I was thinking, like, what it is that I can talk with Jan Gehl about that is not already in multiple lectures and multiple YouTube videos and channels. So it's a little bit hard. I mean, I think also for you, it would be more interesting if we could maybe tread a little bit outside the beaten path and not talk about all the things that you've most commonly talked about. And it's a little bit hard, but I'll try. And I would like to start by asking you a little bit about your views on you've been writing and working on these topics of cities that are more let's say people oriented, and they are more kind of in the human scale and things like that. You've established these concepts, but what have you seen in your life experience in terms of change? Have you seen cities changing and becoming more, a little bit more sensitive to the human scale, or how do you see? What kind of transformation have you seen worldwide? And are you an optimist for cities? These are the initial questions that I would like to ask you about.
I am very much an optimist, and I've seen great changes. I suggest you come to my hometown of Copenhagen. They have worked now for 59 years in humanizing the city. They have as a strategy, we will be the best city for people in the world. And another strategy, we will be the best city for bicycles in the world. They worked on these strategies on and off for 59 years, since 1962. And actually, much has been achieved in these areas, and it is a very nice city to be in, and also a nice city to be old in and to be a child in. So I've seen this transformation of Copenhagen, which this year again is back on top of the monarchical list of livable cities, best livable cities in the world. But I've seen transformations, remarkable transformations. I worked very much with Melbourne, with Sydney, with New York, and with Moscow. And in all these cities, there are very strong visible evidence of a more humanistic approach to city planning. And that is very nice to be as old as I am, because then you can see the things being changed, and you can come back and see the new situation. That is very, very, it's quite a favor, quite a nice thing for any person and I'm very positive and optimistic. But I think there's one important thing, that is what has been achieved is very much in the existing cities, which were made for people, but were invaded by motor cars. But they had the spaces and the dimensions. And in these cities, there were citizens who demanded better quality. And the politicians would listen to the citizens. And also, the work was not so hard because it was really to clean up after the automobile invasion. And if you look at the places, the main street in Sydney, the main street in Moscow, the Pushkin Square in Moscow, the Times Square in New York, they are all places of the old city which have been invaded and which have been cleaned up. What I'm less optimistic about is the new stuff, because I think this Brasilia syndrome, as I call it, the modernistic ideas of not looking at a city as a system of spaces for people, but as a system of objects, of architectural objects, which are organized in some nice pattern. So I think that my fellow architects, the developers and the real estate agents, they have not understood so much about this cities for people thing, which was actually how all the old cities were made. It's only for 50, 60 years we've had the modernistic period, and I see this as an unfortunate period in city planning, which will soon be over. But but it's much more progressed in the existing cities, where it's more more easy to do it, and where the citizens are demanding changes, than to convince the developers and architects to look much closer into making the new towns much more people-friendly. No more Brasilia, please.
I don't know if you know, but I'm speaking to you from Brasilia right now. I'm a real estate developer, and we are working here on a big project. We actually had the help of Gehl architects a while back here. And so we absolutely understand what you're saying. But it is, from my perspective, dealing with the city, with the academia, and with other developers, with architects, with the partners, suppliers, everyone in, let's say, the supply chain and the entire industry of real estate in Brazil. It is still very hard to bring these ideas to the front. To be fair, there are quite a large number of developers in Brazil, and large number of cities that are already, that have read your books and that have read books from other authors that speak about the same things. But there's still a minority, and it is still a big challenge. And this is one of the other things that I would like to hear comments on, because we still have, our cities are still pretty much prepped as 20th century cities. And I think that one of the biggest changes from the cities from before, as we were talking about, is that today we have this, how can I say this obsession with zoning laws and regulations and all those codes that cities did not have before the modernist age, and that today they kind of they're always in the way of innovations and changes. So, for instance, many cities in Brazil have a requirement of a minimum number of parking spaces per unit in every new residential building and things like that. So these things are still a legacy from a 20th century thinking, and is what are your thoughts on this? I mean, how can we promote these kind of changes when they're kind of already there in the law, in the existing zonings and codes and things like that?
I think what you're referring to are a lot of regulations and rules which springs out of the modernistic way of thinking.
Exactly.
That the city should be a machine for living, and instead of spaces, in the old cities, they were always made up of spaces where life could go on. The new cities are made out of objects where architects really can have a great time making funny objects, and where the land which is not built upon in many cases is leftover space. And people never liked to be in leftover space. They liked to be in spaces which were purposefully made for them to have a good time. So we still have a lot of modernistic thinking in the way we make the regulations and the building laws. And I think I made this strong difference between that all the good things I can think of has happened in existing cities where there were citizens who demanded better quality for people. And if you, but not in the new stuff. And if you ask people, you don't have new citizens in the new cities when you are not built them yet, so you don't know who they will be, cannot ask them. But generally, if you ask people what they would like in the new stuff also, you will find that it's very close to what they ask in the old city fabric. They would very much like people-friendly spaces and human scale and nice climate and not too much noise and pollution, whatever. And they have the same aspirations, but they have more difficulties in getting to the architects and the developers because when you build this stuff, some people will buy it or move into it because they have no alternatives generally. So it will be used. At some point, we started in our office to make a great new book called Great New Towns of the 21st Century. And through our contacts in all over the world, in many continents, we got them to send us suggestions for new towns which were of great quality. And every day we saw there were fewer and fewer. And in the end, it was the thinnest book in the world. We only found about 5 new towns from the 21st century, which could rightfully go into a book about great urban new towns in the 21st century, because so much, our way of thinking are so much influenced by the modernists and so much influenced by our long tradition of making the cars happy. We are more concerned with making the cars happy than making people happy. So all this thinking is there everywhere, which makes it difficult to make great new towns for the 21st century.
But yeah, you mentioned...
Maybe you're better in Brazil.
No, there are some good examples of new developments, but we're already very urbanized. So we're about 85% urban already in terms of our population. So what I think the biggest challenge that we have is to actually to reinvent and to really reshape the cities that we've built. And a lot of the largest cities in Brazil have expanded a lot during the 20th century. So they're embedded with these modernist thinkings. For instance, São Paulo, by the beginning of the 20th century, São Paulo, which is the largest city in Latin America, had about 600 kilometers of trams within the streets, and they've dismantled 100% of those lines to give weight for cars. And today they have, I think, less than 200 kilometers in urban trains and subway together. So this is a crime. I mean, what would you say? I mean, it's hard. But I want to go back to one of the topics that you said, that if you ask people, they will ask for more livable spaces. And actually, well, at least in some part, when we're doing new developments, what we see is people actually going against density, going against more, let's say, more compact cities. People are, this is very common, I understand that in Brazil, but also elsewhere, that people that are already there, they are usually in, they will usually be against new developments, redevelopments, and changes in the city space that they already have. So you ask people, do you want your city to have more hospitals? Yes, of course. Do you want them to be next to your home? No, I don't want to put them somewhere else. Do you want more density and compact city and city life and all that? Yes, yes, of course, that's nice, but not here where I live. Here I want my big plot with big setbacks, and because if you bring new developments here, you're going to have more traffic and more congestion, and people, different people from myself will be coming here. So this is what the Americans call the NIMBYs, the not in my backyards. What are your, I mean, have you had experience in the projects that you've worked with people actually being afraid of these changes? How do you respond to that?
I think that one very interesting new factor is that in our cities by now, we have generally 20% of all the inhabitants, they are retired old people, and they may have a completely different outlook to these ideas which you're putting forward. We have in our country a very strong movement of old people moving into settlements which are especially for plus 50 years of age, so that you in your old age could also be closer to people, have more in common, share more things, go on journeys together. So it's something about that, a new situation for many of these guys who are sitting there, not in my backyard. Suddenly, when they are alone and the wife or the husband has died, they have another attitude. They would like to have a neighbor, and it should not be too far away, all these things. So I would generally say that if we can make cities which are good for the young ones and the old ones, all the rest will also find a good way. And if you show pictures, people, of what could be the alternative to the way they're living, as you described it, with big lawns and much maintenance and all and absolutely no people nearby. If you show people various images of settings here and there and say, which place could you see as a nice place to live, you will find that there is this great urge to have more, better social spaces, better informal city life in your neighborhood than being absolutely alone and all dependent of 2-3 cars per household.
Yes, absolutely. I agree entirely. Yeah, let me ask something. We're in the process of rediscussing the zoning law for a few cities in Brazil. We're always in this process because our zoning laws, they have to be changed and reviewed every 10 years. So at any given moment, you have some capitals and some large buildings, some large cities going through this discussion. And the discussions are very similar to one another. I mean, they're always the same. And the change kind of gets instilled in those zoning laws kind of at a very, 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 I think they're getting a little bit better, but still the change is very little at each of these cycles. One of the things that we've been thinking about is, out of all of the problems that we have in our codes and building codes and zoning and all that, which are the most important? Which are the urban parameters? Which are the technical specifications that are most relevant to allow for more livable places? So maybe it is, I don't know, promote more mixed use. Maybe it is to remove setbacks. We have like an obsession in Brazil with setbacks, and this is a problem because we've gone vertical, but then we have the setbacks. So we have typical, let's say, building in Brazil will be in a big plot and with the building in the middle and a fence around it. And this building goes 25, 30 stories high. So it's probably the worst possible way that you could.
And also surrounded by parking.
Surrounded either by parking or by
combination of park and parking.
A combination by a park that nobody uses and parking that is filled with cars. And sometimes also very common in Brazil is that they would bring this concept to the next level where they would put this 3 or 4 stories high. So they will do above ground parking for 2 or 3 stories. And then you put the building in the middle of that structure on top of it with like what they call a leisure area on top of this. So, and I mean, what do you think? I mean, what would be like a rule of thumbs? I mean, if you have to take down one of these things, what would be? Would it be setbacks? Would it be height limits? Would it be specification of uses? Which is, I mean, this is something that is a hard fight to fight. They want in Brazil to specify to the smallest detail what can you build and what you cannot build in each of the lots.
And I know you have another problem which is very prominent and important in Brazil, that is the fear of crime. Yes. That people protect themselves and have setbacks and barbed wire and all kinds of stuff because of some social problems in the society. And it is, of course, very fortunate that in our part of the world, we don't have that kind of fear. So we are more open. I have had several commissions by some very idealistic clients who wanted me to help them to build something which was good for people. And in all cases, we ended up by saying that to have a settlement which is good for people, it should be just as good outdoors as it is indoors. So instead of using all the energy by putting marble in the bathroom and making big kitchen and panorama windows, we will say do that, but also make sure that it's so attractive outside that you want to go for it with your dog, that you want to go for a walk, and when you're old, you can do your exercise. And we also are listening very closely to World Health Organization, who say we now have a serious problem in the world, that is sitting syndrome, that people do not move enough. And the World Health Organization will say, make cities so that people walk and bicycle as much as possible in their daily day situation, so that they can have a much longer life and much better quality of life in the old days. So today, because of the climate, because of the sitting syndrome, the concern for personal health, it is a lot of things are done to make the outdoors just as attractive as we've become used to make the indoors. And we found, of course, if we do it right, people would like to spend time, people would like to go for walks, people would like to go to the supermarket to get the exercise and the fresh air and some grocery. Of course, they also buy on the internet and whatever, but it's so nice if you can combine an ordinary life using your own energy and also meeting casually the people who are in your neighborhood and in your city, your district, instead of just looking at the television and sitting in your car. But various regions are different, the climate is different, and the social situation is different. And we in Scandinavia may have some conditions which enables us to do that kind of settlements better than in your case. But that's what I have noticed.
What my opinion on this is that people they think that the only way to solve security is to put up a big fence with the barbed wire and the cameras and all that. They do not see these things as alternatives. They do not see that, oh, if you have eyes on the street, as Jane Jacobs would put it, I mean, you can have, it's safer actually than to have cameras on the street. It's much safer. And so I think the challenge is to,
and your life will generally be better. You quality your life. If you are not depending on safety cameras, but you live in a safe neighborhood.
Exactly. Do you think there is any kind of positive take from modernist approach to city planning? There's anything that was that we can, I mean, let's be generous. I mean, if we were to be very generous.
But of course, what really happened was that before modernism, they always thought about the life of the city and what spaces you should have for the life and where to put the buildings, so you created the spaces. So it was, the order was life, space, buildings, always in the old settlements until modernism. But with modernism, everything was put upside down. First you put the buildings, and then you looked out of the window and saw that there was a pieces of land. And then you called in the landscape architect and said, do some landscaping here. And then you looked out of the window to see if there was life, which there generally was not. So they had buildings, space, and generally very little life. And that's complete other order of operation as before. And the good cities I know also of 21st century are made on the old recipe: life, space, buildings, instead of building, space, perhaps a bit of life. It's too late in Brasilia to think about life when you have built the buildings. I would say.
It's not too late. It's not too late because what we have in Brasilia is that the central part of it is well, it's heritage listed. It's not change anything, and that's gonna be like that forever. And but around this downtown, the central part, that we have all other opportunities.
I like that part of Brasilia much better than the first part of Brasilia.
Yes. But going back to this question, I know this is a little bit provocative, but I wanted to ask you, do you think there is any positive thing that we get from the modernist thinking and the modernist approach to city planning and city building? Or it, I mean, complete, let's just throw it up.
No, because part of it was, of course, a modernization of a number of things, that you have more techniques in the house, better heating systems and sanitation systems, better ventilations. There are, and also in the construction, you also developed easy ways of mass production and using factory-produced buildings, components, whatever. So there was a number of necessary modernizations of the way we built buildings and how we organize them and how we equip them, and which was good for health and good for being more productive in the building industry. And of course, many of these improvements can be used, but the very crucial thing was that they didn't know anything about people, and they made all their ideas out of the blue, defining that now we have a new species. We don't have Homo sapiens anymore. We have modern man, and he is completely different, and he wants to live in a machine. And the major problem in the city is that he can go to work and back again and recuperate to next day he go to work. That was a very technocratic and rational thinking, but man is not a machine, and so he doesn't fit so well when the city is conceived as a machine. But there was a lot of details in the modernization of the building industry, which are very useful and are used today also in the good new towns, which are here and there, of course.
Okay. Yes, we're getting to the end of this. This is amazing conversation. I would love to be here the whole day with you, Gehl, but I know that you have a lot of things to attend to, and I think that I just want to get your impression on what's the future going to be like. What do you think that is the next steps? I mean, what do you think the next? How can we make sure that a lot of new technologies coming? Some people are very worried about for instance, the self-driving cars. And will they push back on this this struggle to bring the cities back to people, and or not? And what do you think? What do you think will be the 21st century city? Well, at least what should be like the 21st century city?
I remember a remark after one of my lectures in São Paulo, where some person said, it will be wonderful when we have the self-driving cars, because then we can have twice as many cars on our freeways, and that will solve the mobility problem. I think that was the most awful perspective for the future I ever heard. I think that the major challenge we have, that is the challenge of the climate, the challenge of reducing the resources we need for building and for living in our cities, and we have to move closer together to have better heating systems, better garbage collecting systems, less services, less expensive services. So we have to develop our concept of mobility beyond the idea of Henry Ford from 1905, that mobility is giving every man a ton of steel and 4 rubber wheels. That was a good idea 120 years ago in the Wild West, but it's certainly not a good idea in a city with great density, with many, many people like São Paulo or other big cities. And really the mode of organizing mobility in a way so it's better for the climate and still is very efficient, that has been delayed very much by the access to cheap gasoline. And so actually the good old idea of Henry Ford, that technology has lasted now for 120 years, and it's my point of view, it is outdated, and that in the future we must put less emphasis on mobility. We will have to listen more to the new ideas coming out from Paris about a 15-minute city where you minimize mobility as best you can. Actually, all the old cities were 15-minute cities. I think that we must reduce the number of individual cars. We must share the cars much more. We shall not make parking lots for each apartment, but maybe make 10 parking lots for 20 or 30 apartments and say, now you can share this pool of cars. Today, the cars, they are resting for 95% of their entire life. That is a complete waste of resources and a complete waste of city land to have all these sleeping cars all over the place. So there are so many not too smart solutions we have today. And I do hope that in the next 20 years, we will be able to address these problems more and more. So we will have less need of mobility and have also much better cities and residential areas, so that we can have a more full life, especially because we will be 20 or 30% elderly people who have other needs than the modern man who is rushing from his work to his bed every day in the old concept. We have a much more diversified world now, and we know much more about how to make good cities for Homo sapiens.
Oh, yeah, we do not know what the future will bring, but I am absolutely certain that our cities will be better in the future because of your work and because of your thoughts. I hope you're very, very, please take this as a very sincere appreciation for everything that you've done. And well, oh, there's one more thing I want to ask you. Sorry, but I have to put this last question there. We have an issue here that's bothered me for a while in Brazil, which is we do not have a planning degree. We do not have urban planning degrees in the universities. We do not have urban, not even urbanist design. What we have is the architecture schools have kind of incorporated urbanism. So they call themselves architect and urbanist. When they get the degree, they say they're architect urbanist, architect/urbanist. And I think that because, so basically what happens is that all we have is architects. What's your advice for Brazilian architects? I mean, they are not only designing buildings, but they're also in the cities. They're putting up the regulations for the cities. They're designing the settlements, the land parcelings, and the subdivisions. They're doing everything. They're doing all the work. What would be an advice you would have for especially the younger architects that are kind of getting out of school today? They're about to start their career, and what could they do to be a part in this
I think
transition?
Here's an object. And I think that in most architecture schools, they are very much concerned with the objects, with the form, because form is easy to communicate in pictures, and it's easy to discuss, it's easy to study, to do research about form. And in many schools of architecture, they are so obsessed about form and forget that this is not architecture, this is sculpture. Architecture is the interplay between form and life, and just as much energy should go into studying life and the interaction between form and life, how form influences life. And so I will challenge the young architects to take much more concern for the other half of architecture, which is life, because only if the life and the form goes well together is it good architecture together. So this is not architecture, this is.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jan. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here, for sharing a little bit. And we're honored to have had the opportunity to be speaking to you today. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So now, Jan, as we spoke in the beginning, we are currently promoting the translation of David Sims' book, Soft City, which is, well, yeah. I have the focus here, building density for everyday life. And you wrote the foreword, so I take it that you've read the book. And what do you think is, how do you think Brazilians could benefit from David's ideas? And what's your take a little bit on what's a soft city and what's the relevance of this concept?
I think that in the foreword, I take great, I am very careful to point out that this book is out of a tradition, which is a wonderful tradition. It actually comes from the time before the modernists, and it has been followed by the very famous and great Swedish English architect Ralph Erskine. He was able to do fantastic housing areas where he looked after the form and all the way down to the time when all the details were in place. and it was a wonderful place for people, and also it looked fantastic. And so he always had this big heart and looked after all the aspects, the city plan, the site plan, the details, and the outdoor landscape. The whole thing was put together in a fantastic way. That is a special tradition which really had been survived in Sweden. And David is actually very much influenced by this. So am I. Actually, Ralph Erskine was a personal friend of mine. We always discussed. He said, I've been much inspired by your work. And I said, I've been inspired by your work. But I think that all the things I ever wrote about can be found in Ralph Erskine's and his followers' work. And that David Sim's book, Soft City, is very much a product of this, putting all the things together so that you have a wonderful city for people, also which works well and it looks good. So I think that you will have great joy in publishing this book and reading it.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for this. And again, it's been an honor. Thank you very much. There's no words to thank you.
You're welcome, and I will leave you and wish you a good Friday.
You too. Have a nice weekend, and I know that you have travels coming next week, so good travels for you. And
I'm going to Venice with my grandchild.
Amazing. Great place to be with your grandchild, right?
And I take all my grandchildren to Venice to show them what a real city would look like for people.
I think that maybe this is a hallmark. If there is one city that grandparents would like to bring their grandchildren to, then it's a good city. I mean, then they've done it right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. And actually, Venice is a very good city for old people, as long as they can take the little stairs over the canals.
Yes.
And the kids love Venice because they can roam all over, and they have no playgrounds in Venice because the city is a playground.
Amazing. Yes.
So I look forward to go back there after the COVID lockdown. Now we can again start to communicate across the borders. It's really wonderful to be let loose. I hope for a good situation in Brazil, and hope that you will get out of this situation as soon as possible.
We're trying. We're trying, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And I'm looking forward to going back to Europe as well, to going back to Copenhagen and all those places. Okay, Jan, thank you so much for this time, and looking forward to...
You're welcome.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.